Deep inside an abandoned mine in Siberia, scientists drilled through a layer of permafrost over 30,000 years old. Inside, preserved as if time had simply stopped, was a virus. Enormous, ancient, and completely functional. They thawed it in a laboratory and it began replicating again, as if nothing had happened. Now the question no one wants to answer out loud is, how many others are out there waiting? If you want to understand what the thawing of our planet could unleash on us, stay until the end. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it right now, because every week we bring you science and history topics that will change the way you see the world. Permafrost is basically the oldest freezer on the planet. It is a layer of soil that remains frozen year-round, sometimes for tens of thousands of years. It covers about 1/4 of all the land surface in the Northern Hemisphere: Russia, Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia. These are regions where the ground never fully thawed since the last ice age. And inside that soil exists a library of ancient life, more complete than any museum humanity has ever built. Think of it this way. Each layer of ice is like a page in a book. Dust, pollen, air bubbles, spores, cells, fragments of DNA. Everything gets trapped as the ice forms. Year after year, layer after layer, the record accumulates. When scientists drill that soil and pull out an ice core for analysis, they are reading chapters that no one has touched for millennia. Except unlike ordinary books, these chapters can walk out of the laboratory if we are not careful. In 2014, a group of French researchers thawed a sample of Siberian permafrost and found something no one expected: a giant virus. So large it could be seen with a simple optical microscope, the same kind you probably used in high school biology class. They named it Pithovirus Sibericum. It had been locked in the ice for approximately 30,000 years, 3 decades of millennia. And upon contact with a host cell, it began replicating normally. The biological machine still worked. But wait, before going into full panic mode, there is an important detail here. This virus infects amoebas, not humans. For a virus to infect a cell, it needs to fit its proteins onto the surface of that cell like a key fitting into a lock. A virus that spent 30,000 years co-evolving to infect prehistoric microorganisms probably has the wrong key for your body. Our biology has changed considerably since then, but probably not enough to sleep completely easy. Because scientists did not find only generic viruses in the permafrost. They found recognizable genetic fragments, traces of the 1918 Spanish flu, pieces of the smallpox virus, genes from pathogens that modern medicine has already catalogued and studied. This means that diseases we consider extinct, or at least controlled, are preserved out there, waiting. The difference between finding broken fragments of genetic code and finding a fully functional virus capable of triggering an infection may simply be a matter of preservation conditions. And as the permafrost melts, those conditions are changing. Now comes the part that truly concerns specialists. It is not necessarily the virus itself that will cause the next pandemic. It is what can happen when ancient microbes encounter modern bacteria. Bacteria are extraordinarily good at adapting. They do this in a way that sounds like science fiction, but is basic biology. They exchange genetic material with each other constantly. Imagine 2 microorganisms meeting in soil that has just thawed. One of them is ancient, carrying resistance genes that evolved tens of thousands of years ago in response to natural compounds in the environment. The other is modern, lives in inhabited soils, has access to warm hosts like animals and eventually humans. These 2 exchange genetic information. The modern one absorbs the resistance genes from the ancient one. And suddenly, you have a contemporary bacterium adapted to today's world, using survival tools developed before human existence. This is not a hypothetical scenario. We have already seen something very similar happen. In 2016, a heat wave struck the Yamal Peninsula in Siberia. Temperatures climbed close to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, something completely abnormal for that region. The soil began to thaw. And in that soil, buried for decades, were carcasses of reindeer that had died from anthrax in the early 20th century. The anthrax bacillus has a particularly frightening survival trick. When conditions become difficult, it forms spores. These spores enter standby mode and can survive for centuries with no metabolic activity whatsoever. When the ice melted, the spores were released. Reindeer grazing in the area were exposed. An anthrax outbreak spread across the region. More than 2,000 reindeer died. Dozens of people were hospitalized. A child died. This was not a laboratory experiment. This was real life. It was the past literally emerging from the ground and causing deaths in the present. And as the planet warms, this kind of event will become more frequent. Arctic permafrost is thawing at rates that surprise even the most pessimistic climate models. Regions expected to remain frozen until the end of the century are showing instability today. Every square meter of soil that thaws is potentially an archive of ancient biological agents being opened without any safety protocol. But there is another angle to this story that goes beyond direct human health. Think about the base of the ocean food chain. Phytoplankton, microscopic organisms that perform photosynthesis in the surface layers of the oceans, are responsible for roughly half of all the oxygen we breathe. When permafrost melts, it releases not only microbes, but also enormous quantities of organic carbon that had been locked away for millennia. That carbon feeds oxygen-consuming bacteria. Dead zones expand. Ocean pH changes, and ancient microbes arriving along with that organic load can compete with plankton species that sustain entire ecosystems. A collapse in plankton does not kill humans directly, but it kills fish, which feed birds, which feed larger predators, and it compromises the ocean's carbon sequestration, further accelerating warming. This is a feedback loop that scientists call a positive feedback cycle, and it is exactly the kind of thing that can push the climate past points of no return. Now, all of this sounds like the script for a disaster movie, and it is easy to fall into despair. But science is also wide awake to these risks. There is an entire field of research called paleomicrobiology, dedicated specifically to studying ancient microbes preserved in ice and permafrost. Researchers are mapping what exists out there before uncontrolled thawing releases it. In high-level biosafety laboratories, samples are analyzed with all the containment protocols you would expect from research involving potentially dangerous agents. The idea is to understand what might emerge before it emerges on its own. There is also growing epidemiological surveillance in Arctic regions. Indigenous communities living near permafrost are being monitored. Early warning systems for unusual outbreaks are being developed. The lesson of the 2016 anthrax outbreak was taken seriously. And there is a data point that puts all of this in perspective. The majority of pathogens that caused major pandemics in human history did not come from permafrost. They came from other animals, from mutations in viruses already circulating, from changes in human behavior that brought populations closer to natural reservoirs. Permafrost is a real risk, but it is a risk that sits in line with many others already demanding attention. What the story of the Siberian giant viruses, the anthrax spores, and the antibiotic-resistant bacteria teaches us is not that the apocalypse is coming wrapped in ice. It is that the planet has memory. That time does not erase everything. That there are consequences for altering in decades systems that took millions of years to stabilize. Ice is not just frozen water. It is an archive. And when you burn an archive, the things that were stored there do not disappear. They escape. The question science is trying to answer right now is not whether we are going to open these archives. We are already opening them. The question is whether we will be fast enough to read what is written in them before the content spread on their own across the world. If this topic left you as curious as it left our entire team when we started researching it, subscribe to the channel right now. Every week we bring stories like this one, where science and history intersect in ways no textbook will ever tell you. And in the next video, we are going to talk about another discovery that had been sleeping for centuries and that completely changed what we thought we knew about extinct diseases. You are not going to want to miss it.